Continuing our series of video tours, M103 is described, perhaps a little bit optimistically, in the manual as a heavily armoured, full-tracked combat vehicle of low silhouette. Into this low silhouette would fit 5 personnel, including notably 2 loaders. Now, the M103 did not have the greatest service career in the US Army, but the Marine Corps took it for much longer. One of those trainee Marines was, at the time, 2nd Lieutenant Ken Estes, who grew over the years to become a historian and author, Kenneth Estes, and he's here with me today to just go over the vehicle that is here at the Military Vehicle Technology Foundation in Portola Valley, California. So Ken, why is it that the Marines kept the M103 program going while the Army abandoned it?
Well, as we know, the Army had several heavy tank projects going on at the end of World War II, but they lost both money and interest in these projects, and they petered out. The Marine Corps, though, maintained its requirement for a heavy tank after the war. Basically, it's because of our doctrine for the amphibious landing, where we originally wanted light tanks of the Marine Division to land in the assault force, then be followed up and reinforced by medium tanks from the higher headquarters. The Corps level tank battalion then would continue the action inland. But when the Marine Corps went to all medium tanks in World War II, that extra reinforcing tank battalion by default became a heavy tank battalion, and so that's what our doctrine and our requirements call for in the late 1940s. We always wanted a heavy tank, and then when we were written into war plans by 1948, which put Marine divisions up against potentially Soviet Army forces in the Persian Gulf, the Western Europe and Southern Europe, became more of an imperative then for the Corps to have its heavy tank. We had bought some M26s in the meantime, but these were carried only as interim or substitute heavy tanks. It was not the heavy tank we wanted for the job. Now we jumped to the Korean War then, and we have the tank crisis of 1950, when all of us have nothing but World War II gear, and the Army prototypes for the next generation, T41, T42, T43, the light, medium, and heavy tanks are just on the drawing boards, and these are rushed into production. The M103 prototype was nothing more than a wooden mock-up at the time, but these tanks were produced all between 1952 and 1953 and entered service as the M103.
Okay, so you're trained primarily in the M48. You come down to the motor pool for your M103 training, you look at this thing, what goes through your mind?
Oh, what a heavy bugger, and how slow it must be, because being brand new tankers, we just wanted to go fast and furious and everything, and we thought this thing would be a drag.
Okay, well, let's go have a look around all the components and see what makes it work. Suspension on this tank consists of 14 pairs of road wheels mounted to arms on torsion bar suspension. Each road wheel arm has a bump stop to prevent it from going up too high, and there are friction snubbers on the number 1, 2, 3, 6, and 7 arms to prevent rocking. Adjusting the track tension on this tank appears to have been a particularly convoluted process. You had to coast to a stop without the use of brakes in such a manner that the track link would stop directly on top of the return rotors. So to go over the process, I'm going to bring Ken back in. So Ken, what is it you have to do?
Okay, let's first look at the compensating idler arm. In there, you notice it's a 6-sided barrel, which actually rotates around a threaded inner arm, and that extends and retracts the idler arm and sets the actual tension. So we'll first take a few turns off that to make the track looser. Then we'll grab a tank bar, and with a couple guys, get in and literally lift the track up so we can put a 1-inch wooden block, 1-inch thick wooden block on number 2 return roller. That done, we'll put a string tightly between the tops of those 2 return rollers, and then we will tighten or loosen the track as necessary to get a 1/8 inch to 3/16 inch difference between, or gap between, the bottom of the track and that string. That's the correct setting. And then we just bend up and grab that piece of wood again, or sacrifice it later on when we drive off. That's how you get the track tension correctly set.
Whilst talking about the idler arm, you'll note that it is physically connected to the number one road wheel arm. As a result, when the road wheel goes up, the idler is pushed forward and down, and this maintains track tension on the entire track. Alright, so we're at the front of the tank. A couple of things here. Firstly, this will be where the handles go for the first and second shots of the fire extinguisher. Then we have the headlight assembly. We have the service drive, blackout service, blackout marker, and there will be a small shrouded light here called the blackout drive. So Ken, when is it that you would use the one versus the other versus the third?
The service drive would be used administratively at night when there's no presence of the enemy or any tactical problem. It's a standard headlight, just like the same one used on trucks. In fact, we have the same high beam, low beam switch for your left foot to use, just like in trucks. The identical light is here, but with a red lens for use in driving under infrared conditions. If we come over here to the hatch of the driver, we see a position for a periscope there. That is the mount for the driver's infrared scope, which actually has two eyepieces and allows you to drive in infrared. The distance, though, useful distance is only about 15 to 20 feet, so you don't go very fast, and it's a very weird situation. You don't get a good sense of depth of perception or anything like that. Then there's so-called blackout driving, which means you have a very small hooded light here illuminating, again, about 10 or 15 feet of the ground in front of you. And this is also done very slowly and very carefully. The blackout marker is for other people to see you. These glow at very, very low levels so that you can keep track of other vehicles in the column. Or if you want to position this tank at night using a ground guide, the ground guide can see the tank by looking at the markers on either side, then use a red lens flashlight to signal the driver to move forward, right, left, stop, and so forth.
The ground guide is basically a guy with a flashlight marshalling people which way to go.
Right, and those markers then would allow you to do that without illuminating any other part of the action.
Okay, so here we are under the business end of the 120 rifle. You got the bore evacuator and a strange little item at the end with two notches on it. What is that for?
Originally it was much larger because we had two large holes about like that in the and on either side. The idea being to have a blast deflector that would vent some of the smoke of the muzzle end to one side and not obscure our sights very much. But it didn't work, so we cut it way back and left those two notches there simply as kind of a spanner tool edge to tighten it down. Its only purpose is to torque down on the bore evacuator so that it won't come loose during shock or firing.
Right, so while we're here talking about the gun, this is not the same 120 that was originally in the Army's T-34, is it?
Well, that's true. The original idea of the Army had, at the suggestion of Army Ground Forces, was to abandon some of the wilder heavy tank schemes they had and to take the well-proven and well-known 120 millimeter anti-aircraft gun and put that into a smaller, more maneuverable tank. And that became the concept. So the T-34 tried that out. But when we went to the 103 project, we made a much more powerful gun, greater chamber pressure, and a little bit longer in the tube. And this was actually the T-123 cannon, much improved in ballistics and, of course, ammunition variety in this tank than you had in the original T-34 prototype.
And you had shot, heat, HE, anything else?
And white phosphorus.
Smoke.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, as we move along the sponson side, behind the main stowage box, what we have here is an ELF air filter housing. There is one housing on each side of the engine. Pull it open. To pull it up, release the locking lever and give a good solid pull. The filter itself, as you can see, it's made of cloth, and what you can do is you can get compressed air, shake it out, blow it, and otherwise clean out the air filter. Return it back into position exactly the converse of the way you took it out. Lock it into place. Close the compartment and bolt it back into place. On the rear left of the tank we have the external telephone, sometimes also known as the tank infantry phone. What will happen is a rifleman who needs support will come up, approach the left rear of the tank, drop down the hatch, pull out your handle, push to talk. Invariably this was a signal for the driver to put the tank into reverse and scare the hell out of the rifleman. Also to note, he could transmit off the radio by the use of a push button. The little red light on the top here was basically the tank driver's way of telling a rifleman to come and answer the phone. He had a button in the crew compartment, the little red light would light up red, and this would be the signal for the rifleman to approach the tank. Alright Ken, so what is it that we're looking at here?
Well, we have here the AVD 1790 cubic inch and diesel engine. The intake air is coming from the inlet we'll see in the turret. You'll show that. So if outside air is coming through this tube into the air cleaner that you demonstrated. The clean air is being sucked then by that turbine, which is, you see the outer part of the turbine, of the turbo intake, which is exhaust driven, and goes at pressure then into the intake manifold of the engine. That's the air supply. The fuel supply we can't see. It's at the front of the engine with its own set of double fuel filters. Notice here the quick disconnects for the electrical connections. This engine can be taken out of the tank in about 30 minutes with a crane, a small crane. We check the oil level here. We do the oil filling in that connection there. On the outside of the engine you have the same setup for the transmission oil. You can also see the top here of one of the three fuel cells. These are aluminum and they conform to the shape of the tank. This allowed us to carry a total of 385 gallons in this tank as opposed to a much smaller amount of gasoline in its predecessor. This little gizmo here is for a purge pump so that you can actually manually pump some fuel out from the bottom. Where you tend to gather corruption of various sorts in the fuel settles to the bottom, including water, which is a nasty thing to have also. So you periodically purge the fuel cells manually with a little pump of the impurities and garbage that sometimes arrives in your fuel despite the fuel filters.
Of course, this is the diesel-powered version of the engine. Why is it that the Marines moved from the previous petrol to the new diesel?
Well, the Marine Corps had its choice. We could go with the Army's new M60, which was a diesel medium tank or main battle tank, but we wanted to keep our fleet, which we'd bought with hard cash some years before. So we took the Chief M60 improvement, which was the diesel engine, and backfitted onto this tank and in the M48 medium. In the case of this tank, its operational range went from about 80 miles in gasoline to approximately 300 miles on diesel. And 80 miles on gasoline, as we tankers know, means you go 40 miles operationally, then you spend the rest of your time trying to find fuel trucks to top you back off again. So it really changed the nature of the tank force, that it now had legs, so to speak, had a real operational range that was useful. Very important for us at the time.
So what is it the Marines had to assist with the recovery of a vehicle of this size?
Well, we fixed that in the Marine Corps because the only recovery vehicle we took after we got rid of the M4 series, the so-called Shermans, was the M51 heavy tank retriever, a a tank retriever built on this chassis, the heavy tank chassis, with an even more powerful gasoline engine, which developed 1,000 horsepower as opposed to the 750 horsepower. It was quite a beast, and it was just as heavy as the heavy tank, but it had a 50-ton winch and a 25-ton crane, and it was pretty much equal to the job of recovering even this bear when it got buried or bogged down.
So at the left rear of the engine compartment, what we have here is the transmission oil dipstick and filler, which appears to be pretty well equipped. And what we also can just see here is one of the steering linkages, which as the driver turns the steering wheel, it applies or reduces power to the transmission. Okay, well that covers it for the engine deck. We'll close it up and move on.